I'm Sébastien Bezot, Director of Policy, Projects and Media Relations of USJE, and I'll be your host. This evening, you will have the opportunity to listen directly from your national president in regard to the Treasury Board directive to the return to work sites, and you'll also be able to ask questions or provide feedback. If you already have questions in mind, feel free to type them right away in the Q&A section, or you can use your raise your hand function, or even just send them in the chat section. Ainsi, notre présentation principale sera faite par David Neufeld, le président national du SESJ, suivi d'une courte série de questions et de réponses. So let's begin by welcoming your national president, David Neufeld.
Hello, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us this evening. I want to begin by recognizing that even though this town hall is being held virtually, we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. In particular, I'm joining you from the ancestral lands of Treaty 1 territory. These lands are the heartland of the Métis people, the territory where my personal residence is located, which is in Winnipeg. Before we start, I want to say thank you to all of you for the crucial work that you do every day in keeping Canadians safe. These last few years have been very challenging, and you, our members, have continued to show incredible dedication to the safety of Canadians. Thank you. And merci pour votre dévouement envers les Canadiens et Canadiennes. This evening's town hall is related to the Treasury Board's directive on the recently announced return to work policy. This is a directive that the Treasury Board has said must be implemented by all departments and agencies by March the 31st. As your national president, I have been very vocal about our union's strong objections to this directive, which requires all federal public service employees to return to the work site a minimum of 2 to 3 days, no matter your role, no matter your responsibilities, and no matter which agency or department you work for. Even though Federal Minister Mona Fortier has stated that the return to office policy must consider the nature of each department's work and the services they provide to Canadians, the reality is the decision about the number of the days in the office and which days those may be is at the sole discretion of the employee's manager and/or director. Since the beginning of the pandemic, USJE has been a vocal advocate with every department and every agency about the transition to the new normal. We have insisted that USJE's members should have some flexibility to choose to work off-site when it makes sense to do so. There is no doubt that the pandemic has highlighted that some work can be done outside of the workplace when the appropriate technology is available and when employers are flexible and creative in their approach. USJ's position on the development of the new normal has always been clear. All telework arrangements must be undertaken in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner. We have repeatedly said to departments and agency leaders that there needs to be a clear structure in place to establish these telework arrangements, so that it is not simply left to the discretion of a local supervisor who can make a decision without sufficient justification. We know and are already hearing that departments which do not incorporate a hybrid work environment as part of the new normal will not be an employer of choice in the future. Now, after Mona Fortier's announcement, I want to let you know I did publish an op-ed in the Hill Times on January the 16th, ironically the same day that the implementation was to begin. And the title of that article was Treasury Board Directive Flies in the Face of Research on Productivity. Further, since the Treasury Board's announcement, USJE is hearing from many members who are struggling with the impacts of a hybrid policy as been implemented. To those of you who have already taken the time to share your story, I want to say thank you. And to those of you who've completed our survey on this directive, I so much appreciate that. The information you are providing will prove to be extremely valuable as we continue to meet with the employers. As some of you know, PSAC did file a policy grievance against the Treasury Board for unilaterally imposing changes to our members' working conditions while we are in negotiations for 165,000 federal public service workers. PSAC's grievance states that the return to work policy contravenes important articles of our collective agreement, as well as the health and safety provisions of the Canadian Labour Code and the Canadian Human Rights Act. The policy grievance is demanding that the government do the following. 1, immediately rescind its hybrid work policy. 2, immediately engage in joint consultation with the union on the return to workplace issue. Thirdly, identify all potential instances of discrimination that may impact members as a result of returning to the workplace for the union to review duty to accommodate as per Article 16 of the collective agreement and relevant provisions of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And finally, provide damages for any losses that might have resulted from this policy. With this in mind, if you are a USJE member who believes they cannot fulfill their obligation to return to the work site as it is being implemented at your workplace, it is imperative that you file an individual grievance within 25 working days from the date that the policy was implemented in your workplace. It is important to know that filing a grievance will not stop the implementation of the policy. You will have to abide by your manager's directives in the interim, but it's the only way to challenge the violation of your rights. If you have never filed a grievance before, USJE can walk you through those steps. The reasons for the grievance could include a lack of access to childcare or elder care, and owing basically to insufficient time to secure the care or long waiting lists. Challenging getting to the work site. There may be sites where there's inadequate transit or transportation. Inadequate office space or broadband space, or broadband at the work site. Unpredictability about which days to be at the office in person. Health and safety considerations for those who are immunocompromised or facing medical or related challenges on the part of themselves, a family member, or other dependent. Or if you were working from home prior to the pandemic and are now being required to go into the office. Filing a grievance is an important procedural step that protects your rights. Ultimately, if the issue cannot be resolved directly with your department, it can be brought to the Federal Public Sector Labor Relations and Employment Board. It also means that the employer must meet with you and your union representative, listen to the problems you are having because of the hybrid work policy, and provide a formal response about what they are doing to correct it. It is important to be careful and document the return to work problems you are having and any communication you have with the employer. Please keep email records and write down the results of any conversations you've had by person or by phone with your manager or other superiors. To file a grievance, immediately contact an executive member of your local. It could be your local president, or you can contact your regional vice president by email or phone. If you have incurred expenses beyond the ordinary costs of attending work and or financial losses as a result of the return to work policy, be sure to identify these damages to your union representative and keep records and documentation of those costs. Now, you may be asking what's next. USJE is wholly committed to continuing to challenge the logic and the value of the Treasury Board's one-size-fits-all return to work site policy. Your actions and willingness to share your experience are extremely helpful to us. If you would like to share why the policy isn't working for you, regardless of whether or not you proceed with the grievance, please reach out to your local regional vice president or email us your story at usjecommunicationsesj@psac.com. Now, in the coming months, USJE will continue to press each department on the issue and demand that we are fully involved in determining the new normal for our members. Many of the smaller departments we represent continue to see higher levels of telework. In fact, many of these smaller departments have seen members working from home for almost 50% of the time. Finally, if you want to send a message, a strong message to the employer, please take the time to cast your ballot in the strike vote. And on that point, I thought I would give you a little bit of an update on bargaining with Treasury Board. And of course, after more than a year of negotiations, The PSAC declared an impasse in bargaining in May of 2022 after the government made a wage offer, and I'll say an insulting wage offer, of 2.06% per year, and that is completely out of touch with record high inflation over the past 2 years. The government then refused to compromise during mediation in September and with the Public Interest Commission hearings in December. As strike votes continue for more than 120,000 federal public service workers across the country, PSAC and the federal government have agreed to resume negotiations with the assistance of a third-party mediator to reach a fair contract for workers. The Common Issues Bargaining Team will continue talks April 2nd to 6th, followed by the PA, the SV, the TC, and the EB teams April 11th to 14th. All you have to do in order to vote is to attend an information session. Some sessions are being conducted in person as well as virtually. Already 30,000 PSAC members have registered for strike votes that are being held from February 22nd to April 19th. Now, to consult and complete the schedule, to see the complete schedule, please visit psacunion.ca. Remote work has become a part of our everyday life in our workplaces. Now it's time to look to the future by enshrining remote work and the right to disconnect in our collective agreements. Je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions et j'apprécie toujours les commentaires de nos membres. À toi, Sébastien.
Merci beaucoup, David. Alors, à ce stade ici, je vais vous poser 3 questions à nos participants et participantes en vous donnant du temps à taper vos questions pour David ou pour notre directrice des relations de travail, Rebecca Thompson. Alors, je vais poser 3 questions à nos participants qui vont paraître à l'écran immédiatement. Alors, question numéro 1. Est-ce que le télétravail est une option que votre employeur approuverait pour votre poste? Oui ou non? Question numéro 2. Depuis le début de la pandémie, travaillez-vous à 100% sur votre lieu de travail? Oui ou non? Parce que certains d'entre vous ont toujours continué à travailler à partir de votre lieu de travail. Alors, c'est ce qu'on essaie de savoir. Et la dernière question, pour vous, est-il important de pouvoir bénéficier d'un milieu de travail hybride? Oui ou non? Alors, je vous donne quelques secondes pour répondre à ces 3 petites questions rapides. Et puis, ensuite, on va ouvrir le plancher pour les questions de la part des participants qui sont sur l'appel. Donc, vous pourriez poser des questions directement à David ou à Rebecca concernant la nouvelle directive du Conseil du Trésor. Alors, je vois qu'il y a encore des réponses qui sont en train de rentrer. Alors, je vais vous donner quelques secondes additionnelles. Puis, voyons voir les résultats. Alors, pour la première question, est-ce que le télétravail est une option que votre employeur approuverait pour votre poste? Majoritairement, 89% disent oui. Question numéro 2. Depuis le début de la pandémie, travaillez-vous à 100% sur vos lieux de travail? Alors, 11% dit oui, 89% dit non. Et finalement, pour vous, est-il important de pouvoir bénéficier d'un milieu de travail hybride? Et la majorité d'entre vous disent oui. Alors, merci d'avoir donné votre opinion sur ce sujet. On va vous donner un peu de temps pour que vous puissiez poser des questions à David ou Rebecca. Entre-temps, je vais vous emporter sur notre site web, faire une petite visite guidée, vite fait, bien fait, comme on peut dire. So I don't know if you've been aware, but since the new directive has been announced by the government near Christmas time, USJE, under the leadership of President Neufeld, we developed our own email campaign to send email messages to Mona Fortier telling her to stop this directive immediately. We had over 1,000 members send that email. You can still do so by going on our website. And we even have some members who still, to this day, will fill out this form on a daily basis. And we do appreciate that. Première question, David. Notre ministère essaye de nous garder en télétravail à temps plein, mais ça se peut que mes gestionnaires ne puissent pas convaincre le Conseil du Trésor. Si on nous force à revenir au bureau, est-ce que je peux quand même déposer un grief?
So thank you for your question. So I will say from my experience in all the discussions I've been having, and I've had a lot of discussions with frontline managers as well, there seems to be a tension here between the front line in some places where they would like to provide a little bit more flexibility than that this present directive provides. And I would suggest that if they are providing more flexibility than the 2 or 3 days, there's ways that they're trying to support that. I will say that for the largest part, though, that we are seeing whether whichever department you're in, that they are leaning more towards the 3 days on site versus the 2 days. And what I'll say is that the larger departments that we represent, both the RCMP and the Correctional Service of Canada, have been leaning on the 3-day minimum on site. Some of the smaller departments have been at 2 days, and that's what they are starting with. And it's from what we're being told, they're prepared to continue that. Our position has been very clear about flexibility and even the creativity of creating a hybrid work environment that supports our members. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, there's certain areas in which we certainly are asking you to file a grievance and to make a point that this policy is in fact discriminatory and is not supporting your particular position. Again, we were talking about elder care, we were talking about childcare, we were talking, and I'll tell you, our survey, which I had a chance to take a look at the other day, it was amazing to me on how many people who are immunocompromised or have people who are immunocompromised in their homes, and they're very concerned about the level of telework that is being forced upon them. So there are, again, a number of situations which are very clear to file grievances. What I'm hearing is some people are very concerned about filing grievances if, for example, that any of these conditions do not apply to them. What I will say to you from my perspective in these grievances, the more grievances that are filed and are brought through whichever department you represent, I think it's a clear indication to Treasury Board that this policy needs to be rescinded. And I will say that there's been a much debate in the media about, the value of hybrid work and telework. But what we know and what we learned during the pandemic is our members have learned how to do their work differently. And again, it's not about not doing work, it's about doing it from home, off the work site. So again, the grievances are certainly very important to file. I encourage you to contact either your local executive member, and I gave the example of the local president, or your regional vice president, and they will be able to help you with that grievance. And there is specific grievance wording that we are using as well. And maybe what I'll do is I'll turn over to Rebecca as well, just to see if she has anything else to answer to that question.
Thanks, David. What's going on there? There we go. So yes, looking at the question, I mean, it does really depend on your circumstances, the circumstances that are being offered, and how reasonable your managers are being. But if there's no reasonable basis for them to demand you to be at the office for a certain amount, or even potentially at all, then yes, a grievance is certainly open to you. And I did get another question about how the response has been so far from the Treasury Board and departments we've tried to engage in. Like I said, very variable. Some departments have been great. They've been willing to work with us. They've been flexible. Others, not so much. So, oh, and we got another one. Do we know how much the government is spending for workspaces that we actually don't need? We would have to look into this. I don't know offhand. I know some departments did downsize their office spaces. Some have gone to things like hoteling models and open concept offices where you book a non-dedicated space when you do need to go in. But I don't know how much money that involves or anything else, because the buildings may belong to the government or they may be leasing them. So we may find out when the budget comes out, which is supposed to be quite soon, I believe, next month.
David, did you want to touch on this? I know Rebecca briefly touched on this question. How has the response been so far from Treasury Board, departments, and agencies that you've tried to engage with about the new directive?
So in terms of the new directive, I can tell you that departments we represent, for the vast majority are saying, listen, this is the directive that we've been given, we have to follow it. Some smaller departments are saying, I think we figured this out already. And for the most part, a lot of these departments have seen people coming in up to 2 days per week already. So there's not a lot of change. But what I will say is for the larger departments, whether it's RCMP, the Correctional Service of Canada, that because of the 3-day minimum, what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that the department and the managers in particular are saying, listen, that's the minimum, that's not the maximum. And they're pushing the 4 and the 5 days. Now, I have seen some instances recently, and they've come to my attention where managers are taking a little bit more discretion and trying to define what it might look like moving forward, but we want to create a certain criteria in which we're going to approve additional telework. But I would say for the vast majority, that's not what we're seeing. So when it comes to the rescinding of the policy, I have received no message from Mona Forche, nothing. So I can tell you that there are plans in place to try to get Mona's attention. It'll probably happen in the very near future. You guys will get information about this and some of the action we're going to take. I do believe we need to become mobilized around this issue. My honest opinion is that this government, particularly Mona Forche, figures if we drag this out long enough, this will become the new normal. And I can tell you as national president, this has been priority one in this term of office. We fought extremely hard during the pandemic to ensure that there was as much telework possible for people, for our members, where it's possible. And that fight is not ending because they put this directive in place. And sometimes I get the question, even as national president, do you ever get frustrated because you feel like they're not listening to you? I can tell you that happens every single day. You do get frustrated, but you need to know that if you have your membership behind you and we continue to do things like we have been, which is email petitions, sending letters in, doing surveys and coming back with empirical evidence, eventually I believe that we can be successful here. I really do. And I think that as long as we don't let this go, because this has the potential of impacting many of our members and their work time, their workspaces, there's so many benefits to this. And one thing that I'll say too, in the op-ed that I penned for January 16th, we talked about the productivity of our members. And I was very clear that if you look at the productivity of what we're doing when we're offsite and doing the same work that we could be doing in your cubicle, at your desk, whatever that is, that in fact, our members are telling us that they're more productive. So rather than trying to switch the channel and say, well, this isn't about productivity, this is about consistency across the departments, I think the federal public service under Treasury Board is missing the point. We can become even more efficient and be more productive if they would actually listen to what our members are telling us and then how they can continue to serve and protect Canadians.
Great. David, yesterday we had another webinar. So this is our second one on this topic, and we received a lot of good questions yesterday. So I just want you to cover a few of those because I'm sure it would pertain to the members listening this evening. So why did CSC Commissioner Ann Kelly pick 3 days as a minimum? Why can't 2 be an option?
Okay, well, I'm going to speak a little bit more generally outside of Ms. Kelly, who's the commissioner of CSC. I'll also say that in the RCMP, it's the same thing, 3 days a week. And what I can tell you, and I'll start with the RCMP side, nothing but crickets, nothing but crickets. And you know what really frustrates me about this is that even this past week, we've been hearing what a great relationship Brenda Lucky has with certain unions. I think we should all have that relationship. And when it comes to talking about telework and the hybrid work environment, the response is because we can, because this is what we need to meet our mandate. And it's pretty much as simple as that. In the Correctional Service of Canada, where we have regular meetings We have meetings even outside of national labor managements and regional labor managements. The response was clear, because we can. And it all goes back to the actual, and I have it here in front of me, and I would encourage you to take, oh, you can't see it on the screen. It's called the Common Hybrid Work Model for the Federal Public Service. And this is what came out on December 16th. It has a Q&A as well. And it talks about what the authority the employers have. And even when it says, why was 2 to 3 days of on-site work chosen for this common hybrid work model? The answer that they provide, the Treasury Board provides, is the on-site presence of 2 to 3 days each week, 40 to 60% of regular schedule, reflects the benefits that are consistent with in-person experiences offer, all the while maintaining flexibility of working off-site. So when the CSC sees this, what they're saying is that maintains a certain level of service. And what they're saying when it comes down to the extra day or two that may be required on site, their simple response is, this is what we need to do to meet our mandate. And we all know, those staff, those members who have been working throughout the pandemic know that that is not true. That we know that there can be more flexibility. And I'll tell you, at the highest levels of meetings that we have, we understand that even just allowing the flexibility, and if there are days where people need to come in because something is going on, well, we're not going to push against that. Then things would need to be done. Our members are prepared to do that. So we are promoting the same flexibility, with every department. And unfortunately, some departments like the Correctional Service of Canada and the RCMP have just decided it's 60%, and that's just the way it is.
Thank you, David. So we answered all the questions that came in, but we'll give you a little bit additional time for you to type questions, comments, suggestions. Another question that we had received, David, let's see here. In the CSC community, we have members that work out in the community to fulfill their duties. It seems like there are some managers that think return to office means that we have to be sitting in our offices. Shouldn't work in the community count as office day?
So this particular question is something that we have been discussing with the Correctional Service of Canada since the implementation of this policy. There's always been agreement at the national level, and that included discussions that I've been having with high-level officials. The fact that if I am out in the community meeting with, for example, community organizations, or if I'm out, and I'll give the example of an Indigenous Community Development Officer or other staff that are meeting with, or it could be employment coordinators as example in the community, it could be community parole officers. Whoever that is meeting with offenders or organizations in the community, that's in fact in the workplace. If they're doing report writing and specific duties from home, then that would be considered at home day. So we have agreement with the Correctional Service of Canada on the fact that these additional duties that are being done outside of the home would be considered a work day in the office. And so anyways, just to that particular point, we have put this on the Internal Services Working Group, which is something that is ongoing in the Correctional Service of Canada. And we are going to make sure that this clarification is made and put in the frequently asked questions, because I don't believe that this is clear enough. And I think that there are sites that are taking it further than it needs to be taken in terms of what's considered a on-site workday. And so our hope is that we can get that corrected as soon as possible.
Perfect, thank you, merci. Alors, si vous êtes un membre ou une membre et puis vous voulez déposer un grief individuel, mais vous ne savez pas qui est votre président de section locale ou qui fait partie de l'exécutif de votre section locale ou qui est votre vice-président ou vice-présidente régionale, je vais tout simplement vous guider sur notre site web à savoir comment trouver les coordonnées de vos élus syndicaux. Alors, vous cliquez sur les 3 petites barres-là, je vais aller sur le français. Et puis, sous contact, c'est très clair et précis, contact de l'exécutif national ou des sections locales ou du bureau national. Alors, vous pouvez cliquer sur les coordonnées de l'exécutif national. Là, vous avez les coordonnées de votre président national, de votre vice-présidente nationale et puis des autres régions. Donc, on a ça divisé par des régions et puis aussi par certains départements, donc le SCC et le CLCC, par exemple. Donc, si vous avez des questions, des commentaires ou des problèmes, quoi que ce soit, ces dirigeants syndicaux-là sont là pour vous. C'est vous autres qui les avez élus, donc ils peuvent vous assister avec ces questions que vous avez. Oh, translation apparently is not working. So if tech can look into that, and thank you, Shauna, for bringing this to my attention. So I'll repeat it in English. I don't mind at all. So I was just saying, if you're a member and you want to file an individual grievance and you don't know who your local president is or who your local executive is or your regional vice president, I can guide you. It's easy on our website to find out who the elected official are. You just click under the Contact Us tab. You can go under the National Executive Contact, and there it's all divided either by region or employer. We have the national president, national vice president, and then we have all of our regional vice presidents that you can contact, and they'll be more than happy to assist you and guiding you into filing an individual grievance if that's the route you want to take. So seeing that there are no further questions or comments coming in, David or Rebecca, is there anything else you'd like to add? Oh, just a second, I spoke too fast. We do have a question. Here it goes. My department took advantage of telework during the pandemic to recruit regional office staff to positions at NHQ. Now, those staff will be able to continue telework 100% of the time while local staff remaining in regional offices do so. It's more of a comment or observation, but very interesting. It's
So
a
what I
comment.
was, yes. So on that particular point, and I don't know which department you're from, so you'll have to forgive me. But I know one of the departments that has been doing that is the Correctional Service of Canada. And what we had discussed with the Internal Services Working Group is the fact that if someone was hired during the pandemic and it was made clear in their letter of offer that they were being hired to work in telework situation, and it was made very clear in their letter of offer that that would be supported by the department. Now, again, in terms of accommodations and in terms of trying to create consistency is what they're calling it, there is a process by which it would finally be approved by XCOM. But it was made very clear to us that it's really at their own discretion. And unless you had something in writing, because I am also aware that we had some members who during the pandemic decided to move away from their headquarters area or their site. They moved far distances, and now they could potentially be caught in a situation where they have a long commute. And we had that discussion, and I'll say specifically at the Correctional Service of Canada, and their specific response was, if it was not agreed to and was not anything put in writing, then that in fact would be something that would not necessarily be considered as an exceptional situation. And even if it went up to the XCOM level, my understanding is that they would most likely not support it because it doesn't create the consistency that they're looking for within the department. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Rebecca.
No, and I certainly understand why it's an issue, because they recruited staff out of the regional offices to work for NHQ, but they're not being required to come into the regional offices necessarily because they're working for NHQ. So I understand why that is causing no end of problems, and it is part of it is an aspect of the reasons why we're objecting to this one-size-fits-all blanket policy that fails to consider individual circumstances and regional realities, and also the reality of the type of work that various people do, particularly when you work in headquarters, regional or national. That's very different work than if you're in an institution, in an RCMP detachment, in a parole office in the community. So yeah, we hear you.
Thank you for that comment. Very interesting point, in fact. Now, For some of those who were present on the call yesterday, it is available on our website, and the call that we're having now will also be published on our website. So if you have coworkers who missed it and want to know what was discussed, there was very good questions in both town halls. It can be viewed on our website as well as our YouTube channel. Seeing that there's no other questions or comments coming in, David and Rebecca, I can give you the final word.
Rebecca, if you want to say something before I close.
For me, thank you for being here this evening. We always appreciate when members take time out of their days to join us for these sorts of things. We hope that you can bring this information back to your colleagues and get folks fired up and involved. These upcoming strike votes are going to be very crucial, because if we get a lukewarm response, Treasury Board is just going to plow right over us, and that could have some long-standing consequences for all Treasury Board members, as well as the entire labor movement as a whole. So get out there and vote. Keep an eye on things. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. It is hugely informative. Seb's team puts out a great product every couple of weeks. And keep in touch and stay safe out there. We appreciate the work you're doing, and if you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. My team here at National Office is supporting the RVPs, but we are happy to chat with local presidents or members at large as well. And yeah, USJ is here to help.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I guess where I'll finish my thoughts is I really appreciate the time that you have spent to be with us this evening. For most of you, you probably have a very keen interest on this issue because it's going to have a huge impact on you moving forward. And what I will say, throughout the pandemic, we were very open with the departments as we were developing plans on how to mitigate the risk to our membership in the workplaces that they worked, that health and safety was absolutely number one. But we also knew at some future point that the type of work and the way we do our work would change. There was no surprise here. And in fact, I would suggest to you that the employer knew at some point this would come. What I'll say is that the direction that came out in December, in my humble view, was a desperate attempt to stop our members who work in all 18 departments that we represent, looking to go to other departments where there was more flexibility and there was more ability to do work from home. And I think what they were seeing, and I heard this on my visits across the country last year, whether it was the RCMP, I remember some specific visits where they had 3 or 4 people leaving at a time, to NHQ, where people are leaving. I think the latest stat I heard is there like 5 to 6% of people are leaving to go work in other departments. I think, in my honest opinion, this was being done to make sure that people would stop making the jump to other departments where there was more telework. So I think as long as we continue to put our pressure on and we continue to send very clear messages of how important this is to our membership, I don't think that they can refuse what we're saying. And quite honestly, I think that the fact that you're here tonight, and I'm sure you participated likely in our survey as well, I hope that you will stay connected with your union, stay connected with your local, and also your regional vice president. And don't be afraid to share with us your story. It's important that you stay informed, that you visit our website regularly. We have social media platforms and Facebook. And please reach out if you really want to get involved or require any kind of assistance. And on that, I want to say merci d'avoir participé ce soir et bonne soirée.